So we've got Joe and Chris with us, and we just wanted to hear a little bit about what they've been doing with their neighbourhood group. And about 2 years ago, we changed some of the things that we do in Coventry Vineyard, and we do things like neighbourhood Sundays. But neighbourhood Sundays is where we mobilise church to go out and do things in our community and to practically love our neighbours. But it's not just confined to a Sunday morning. And so we're always keen to see, what is the Lord prompting us to do? What is the Father already doing in a community, and how can we follow his lead and bring love and grace to people in and around Coventry? So Joe or Chris, do you want to tell us just something recently about what you've been doing in your neighbourhood group that's done this, that's expressed God's love in a practical way?
We were in a breakout room. I was in a breakout room with John and Lara Mills a Sunday in September, and we were going to prayer, and Lara mentioned the tower block fire in Coventry, which I didn't know anything about. And she's working with some of the children as part of her work at the school that have been traumatized by it. So we prayed about it, and I said I would pray in the week as well. And it was in the week, I think it was the Wednesday, I thought we could do something about this. So text Lara to say, is there something Coventry Vineyard could do? Could we do treat bags? Is there stuff we could do to help them if flats have been damaged? And she said that everyone was safe, the fire was contained, and that treat bags would be a good idea. Yeah. So then it became about actually getting the treat bags out to who? There's 128 flats. Right. So Lara put me in touch with the Hillfields Hub lady, and the Hillfields Hub lady and Lara put me in touch with a lovely, lovely lady called Ainsley. And she was our connection, because you need her to get in. And she found out of the flats with families, and then we put it to the neighbourhood group the next night and said, what about if we do bags of maybe some colouring, a colouring book and some crayons, maybe something to eat, maybe some shower gel for the mums. Yep. And so neighbourhood started to bring stuff. So that was really good. And Ainsley had got a list together of all of the families, all the flat numbers. Yeah. And Joe and Margot were also available. So the three of us went, and she took us round, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. And we arrived with like bags we looked like we were doing a takeaway delivery, but we had like armfuls of bags going into the flats. And basically we started on the top floor, which was, is it number 17, level 17? And we worked our way down and knocking on doors and just seeing if people were in. And I think we did probably about 2/3 of the flats on that day. And pretty much everybody was really positive as we knocked on the door. I think we all had an opportunity to speak with somebody a bit more than here we are, but we wanted to very much show them that, look, we're coming from, our church just wanted to say, we're praying about you, because it must have been really difficult. And actually I remember going to the floor 14 where the fire had been, and the smell was just incredible. It was just so overwhelming, and they'd obviously shut that part of it off, but there were still people living on the other side of it as well. So it was quite, it was quite challenging for me. I've been in the flats before as a district nurse, kind of know the layout and stuff, but just opening a door to a big family who were all in flats together. And we had some good conversations, good opportunities to say that we're going to pray for them. People were really receptive.
And we had put a pretty card in each bag, because we thought that there might not be so much English, and we wanted them afterwards to be able to look at something and know why we'd done it and who we were. So that the card basically said, you know, we heard about the fire. It must have been a very frightening experience. We're glad you're safe, but we wanted you to know that people care. And we put Love Coventry Vineyard Church. And so everybody got a fair-sized card in the bag. Do you know, Ainsley was the key to this.
Absolutely.
Because a real person of peace, because she'd actually sent a text to every flat that we were going to be visiting to say, these people will be coming with something for you.
Nice.
So that was really, I thought she went over and above.
And what would you say to other neighborhood groups that are just wondering, you know, how can we express love in practical ways to people?
I think it's keeping your eyes and your ears open to what is actually going on around you, but also eyes and ears open to what the Holy Spirit's saying. Because I think that it was the right thing that I was in that prayer thing with Lara that Sunday morning. And, you know, there wouldn't have been any problem. I'd said I would pray, but I just really felt prompted by the Spirit that, because, you know, children and their families has always been my passion. And so, you know, I think I felt I was open to that because it's my passion anyway. And yeah, I think it's just keeping your eyes open. And also, it's not always about that as neighbourhood groups, we can do things as a whole group, but sometimes you just have to prompt for what, you just have to respond to what's going on in your area, and it might only involve you.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's I was going to say, it's like sometimes just the power of just doing ordinary things, you know, being Jesus' hands and feet in an ordinary situation as well. Sometimes it's not about like, this was a great opportunity, but it's probably not a day-to-day opportunity that we get, is it? It was like one of those great God connections that happened. But actually, it's the day-to-day, isn't it? Going out of your front door and opening your eyes.
Yeah, it also comes out of, from the two of you, just a lifestyle of looking for ways to bless other people, isn't it? It's showing love and compassion to people wherever you are.
Yeah, and whether that's your workplace or, you know, where you spend a majority of your time, it's different, isn't it, for everybody? So
yeah. So have you got any other plans or projects or ways in which you're helping people? Anything else that's bubbling along at the moment?
We were talking about, actually, in life group last week, about praying about Christmas, because I think quite a few of us in our group invite neighbours into our houses, and you know, have done traditional mince pie, mulled wine events and stuff like that. So it's trying to think, how can we do that in the climate we're living in, and how can we make something, you know, just make an impact where we live, but probably in a different way that doesn't involve having a whole crowd in your house. Multiple households. So I think that's in the mix at the moment, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I think that I think that probably there's a few of us, and I include myself in this because life's tricky at the moment, but the dark nights, I was born in November, but I'm made for June. You know, I'm made for June. And the thought of the darker nights, the shorter days is a bit tricky when you can't get in people's homes, you know, where you can't share a meal, this sort of thing so easily. And so thought that I need to turn this into something positive. Christmas is about Jesus being light in our darkness. That's what we say. That's on a lot of the Christmas cards I send, you know, Jesus is light in our darkness. And so we were talking about it in group, but also before that, Nick and I had been talking about, well, the idea that we have is it's sort of grown through something else, but maybe we could have a Christmas angel going on in our neighborhood. So we're going to contact the people we know to see whether we could have, like, you could have an angel, a lighted angel in your garden or in your front window or something, and then we would have it almost like a Christmas trail. But that's still sort of going. But the point I want to make is that we need to be thinking now about what that might be. And that's something that we would only be responsible for our neighbourhood, but it could be that other neighbourhoods would like to do something, you know, something like that. But we have to put the effort in to make it happen. And so we want to connect with the other neighbours who would be up for this, because we particularly want it to be a Christmas angel.
Yeah.
And so that's one idea. But also it struck me today listening to the news that, care homes are going through it again. And probably most of the neighbourhoods have a care home in their situation. So I'm thinking, maybe there's families of people that are good at singing and carols, and they can do it outside a care home. There's lots that we could be thinking about now, ready. Absolutely.
So I read an article this week about a writer who wrote a book with a well-known businessman. There was one comment that stood out, and in speaking of this well-known businessman who is now a well-known politician, he said, "There's nothing he hates more than to feel weak and vulnerable and like a failure. So he won't allow himself to acknowledge those feelings, but they'll be there and they will affect him. Unfortunately, should he be re-elected, one of the ways he'll respond to that is he'll take it out on everyone who he thinks diminished or belittled him along the way." And I don't want to make a comment politically on that, but I wonder, what is your response to failure and brokenness? What do you do with your own vulnerability? What do you do with the vulnerability of others? And so we live in a culture that expects constant success. You and I are under pressure to have it all together. We compare and compete our lives with the lives of others. As we journey through this autumn, we're not simply doing a series on emotional health. We are looking to change the culture of our church, to help one another grow spiritually mature as we grow emotionally healthy. The two things are connected: emotional health and spiritual maturity. And so my question for you is, are you willing to take this journey? And to illustrate what it means to live in brokenness and vulnerability, I want to contrast the stories of two sets of brothers. And the first two brothers we meet them in the first book of the Bible in Genesis, and their names are Joseph and Judah. You may have heard quite a bit about Joseph. He's like this arrogant dreamer. He's the chosen one, the younger, favourite brother, and his older brothers are jealous of him and they want to kill him. The oldest brother, Reuben, tries to save his life, but one brother, Judah, comes up with a cunning plan. And Judah says to his brothers in Genesis 37:26-27, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And so they agree to that, and Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt to a man named Potiphar, who's one of Pharaoh's officials. And as you read through the story of Joseph, which takes up about a quarter of the book of Genesis, the stories of these two brothers, Joseph and Judah, are interwoven. Joseph, thrown into prison for his integrity, is later on given greater and greater responsibility, and progresses to the point where at about 30 years old he's put in charge of the whole land of Egypt to prepare for 7 years of famine. In Genesis 41:57 we read that all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. But what about Judah? Well, we hear a bit more about him in Genesis 38, and Genesis 38 is a difficult chapter to read. Cultural values are so very different in this chapter to what they are today. Remember, Bible reading is always a cross-cultural experience. And Genesis 38 begins with Judah running away, abandoning his brothers and his family straight after selling Joseph into slavery. Rather than help his father through the grief of losing his son, he leaves and goes to a distant country and begins a cycle of sin and dishonour. And sin is really anything which breaks relationships. Now, Judah's first son marries an outsider called Tamar. We'll hear a bit more about her in a moment. But then Judah's first son dies, and so the second brother's honourable duty in this culture is to marry his brother's wife and then produce offspring. But he refuses, and then he dies. Now, in this culture, a widow of son number 1 is given to son number 2, and then in the event of his death, given to son number 3. And this would prolong the name of the first son and also provide ongoing care for the widow. So this widow Tamar, however, is sent away by her father-in-law Judah, which is an act of supreme dishonour. Sending her away destroys her reputation and covers her in shame. She would become toxic. She would become destined to live a life of shame, to never marry or conceive. And for her, her life is essentially finished. She's been oppressed by this powerful Judah and is powerless to do anything. Or is she? Because the story takes an interesting turn. Judah's wife dies, and to get over his grief, Judah goes on a sheep shearing boozy bender to numb the pain. Judah is trying to make the most of his life, trying to get over the brokenness of his life. And Tamar sees her opportunity to gain her honour again. She knows her rights. She's broken, she's vulnerable, but she's also heroic and takes responsibility for herself. So she disguises herself and allows Judah to believe that she's a prostitute. And she's playing the long game. Now, in payment for sleeping with her, Judah promises her a young goat. And Tamar asks for something to prove that she will be paid. So Judah gives her his seal and his cord and staff. And Tamar becomes pregnant by her father-in-law Judah. Judah later on sends a friend to make the payment and to get his seal and cord and staff back, but he can't find her. And when Judah finds out that Tamar is pregnant, he orders her to be burnt to death. See, I really don't like Judah. And comparing with Joseph and the integrity that Joseph shows, Judah shows such dishonour. I really dislike him. But then something happens. It says, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you recognise whose seal and cord and staff these are." And Judah recognised them and said, "She is more righteous than I." This is the moment that Judah finally gets honest and vulnerable. This is the moment where this powerful, arrogant, dishonourable man is broken and becomes vulnerable. This is the moment that begins the transformation of Judah. He changes. He's exposed and humbled and broken, and rather than try to hide, he allows this moment and Tamar's action to humble him. And the rest of the account of Judah shows a different man, a leader of his brothers who takes responsibility rather than run away, one who behaves honourably and with humility. You see, after Genesis 38, we read about Judah and his brothers. Judah has changed. He becomes the leader of his brothers. His brokenness begins a journey of life change. Later on, in Genesis 44, when Joseph engineers the situation which will make the youngest son, Benjamin, a slave, Judah, the one who sold Joseph into slavery, steps up and says, I will bear the blame. I will be the slave instead of him. Let me take his place. Let the punishment that is on him be upon me. Let the hurt be on me, so Benjamin can go free. And ultimately, Judah gets the kingly blessing from his father Jacob. From that moment where he steps up and says, she is more righteous than I, where he steps up and becomes vulnerable, he starts to act like Jesus. He's willing to take the blame. Judah becomes someone of honesty and courage. Now that's the first story of two brothers. The second story of two other brothers happens later on in Luke 15, and this time the younger brother is the one that brings dishonour on the family. And in probably the most famous story that Jesus told, the younger brother goes to his father and tells him that he can't wait until he dies. He wants his inheritance now. And so in Luke 15, 13 to 16, we read the younger son got together all he had. He set off for a distant country and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, basically making himself a slave, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. We read that he came to his senses and he turns for home, hoping against hope that he may be able to become a slave in his father's house. But the father sees him returning and runs to him. Now, in that time, in that place, in that culture, fathers did not run. And so we read in verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And broken and vulnerable, he repents before his father. But the father responds not by making him a slave, but by reinstating him as a beloved son. The father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Now, Jesus is telling this story to the religious people who are complaining that Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. And so we read in verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And Jesus is now turning this story to these religious people. And the older son are the religious ones that were complaining about Jesus. It says that when the older son came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, and he can't even call him his own brother, when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. I wonder what you think about these two stories. I wonder what you think about the younger brother or the father or the older brother. You see, I find that when I hold on to my anger or envy or resentment, I am like the lost brother, this lost older brother. When I find myself grumbling and complaining about others, I am like the lost older brother. I find that when I have a hard time letting go of offences, I am the lost older brother. So what can we learn and how can we respond from this? My question is what will you do with your brokenness? Because we're all broken in some way. We're all hurting. We might try and mask it. We might try and pretend that everything is okay. But there is something wrong in all of us. And this is a moment for us to look at what's going on inside of us and to deal with it. What will you do with your brokenness? Will you try and control it and keep it secret? So we find that when we try and keep brokenness hidden, it starts to destroy us on the inside. When you keep your sin hidden, it infects the whole of your life. You see, Judah believed that he was worthless, that his father hated him. He sells his brother and he runs away. He tries to flee the brokenness. And it feels like he's trying to hide the shame which is just consuming his life. See, shame will always hold us back and hold us captive. Shame tells you that what you do or what you have done defines who you are. Shame starts to dictate your life. And so we can try and control our brokenness and keep it secret, but it will infect us in some way. Or we can flaunt our brokenness and just say, well, this is who I am. I'm not going to change, you're just going to have to deal with it. This is who I am. I'm stupid. I can't talk properly, so I just won't speak. I'm just a violent person. I'm just hopeless. It's just who I am. I'm just ugly. I'm worthless. Deal with it. And so whether you try and control your brokenness or flaunt your brokenness, both of those are a really bad way of dealing with what's going on under the surface. See, we might not like to think of it, but Jesus is looking for people like Judah. Jesus wants to transform the destructive patterns that impact and infect families and communities. Jesus wants to break the cycle of destruction and deception. And Jesus is looking for those who have messed up their lives and find themselves broken. Those who are far from God, those whose lives are falling apart. And Jesus is looking for a church that is full of grace and truth. And so our job, for those of us who follow Jesus, is not to be the older brother. It's to create a safe place for people to come out of hiding. A place where people can come home and experience the grace of God. To make church a place for people like Judah. To make church a place for lost sons and lost daughters. We like to say in our church, come as you are, which is all about grace. But don't stay as you are, which is all about truth and grace. Come as you are, but don't stay as you are. Deal with your brokenness. This is a place of grace and truth, a place to get honest with God, to tell him how you feel. When you turn to him, he runs to you. I find that when I confess what's going on, and I have people who I can trust to be honest with, then that's when healing comes. When I make myself vulnerable and say, this is what's going on in my life, this is where I'm struggling, this is why I'm holding on to this resentment, this is why I'm angry, this is why I'm bitter, this is why I'm overeating, this is why I have this immense sadness about what's going on. I find that when I talk to people who I trust, that's when healing comes. And so it matters where and with whom you get vulnerable. So today, who do you need to talk to? Who do you need to get honest with? Who can you trust to help you deal with any shame or sin or brokenness in your life? Who can you become vulnerable with? See, if you want to grow, if you want to become more like Jesus, then vulnerability is the way forward. Brené Brown writes this. She says, staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. She goes on to say, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It is the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path. And so we might wonder, well, how can I show and talk about the difference Jesus makes in my life to others when it feels like my life is a mess? And sometimes we think we have to sort out our own lives before we can share it with others. But of course, our lives are never really sorted, and that's okay. It's part of who we are. We're becoming more like Jesus. It's a journey of becoming more like him, a journey of discipleship. And Paul expressed this as this, he said in 2 Corinthians 4:7, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Alan Scott, in his book Scattered Servants, expresses this beautifully when he says that our communities are drawn to brokenness more than excellence. Our brokenness and imperfection are our greatest gifts. It says focus on sharing your life before you sort it out. You don't need to have it all together before you give it all away. Indeed, you won't find the life you are looking for until you start to share the life you have. He continues, he says, people around us need our brokenness as much as our wholeness. People in your industry, your family and community have become so scarred by life that they are desperate to know if it's possible to recover. If you have a neat, sanitized life, they're never going to ask you to explain where your hope comes from. They'll never ask you how you deal with stress, unforgiveness and debt. However, if you vulnerably open up your pain and with integrity open up your past, they will see that there is hope. They will start asking, how did you recover? How are you recovering? What is the source of your hope? He goes on to say this, your non-Christian friends and family are looking at your life, wondering what you have and how you have it. It's time for you to give the reason for the hope that is in you. Make the decision to courageously, vulnerably, and authentically share your needs and dreams with unbelievers. Involve them in your life. And so it may be that you're looking at this church and thinking, they must have it all together. We really don't. We're all on this journey, and we're all learning to live in brokenness and vulnerability because we are following the one who brings grace and healing and wholeness and hope. And so today, may you know the grace and hope of God, the loving, running, generous Father. And may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his dear Son, our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ. And the blessing of God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you and all your loved ones, wherever they may be, today and for always. Amen.
Oh, the depths of your mercy that saved a wretch like me, and the waves of forgiveness, your blood that covers me. Pour it out. Oh, the weight of your glory that brings me to my knees, and the power of your presence that heals and sets me free. Pour it out. Pour it out. Pour it out. Pour it out. I will worship, I will love you, I will lift you up, give you honor, praise and glory. I will pour it out, pour it out, pour it out, pour it out, pour it out. Oh, the depths of your mercy